When you think of someone famous and important, you tend to think of someone with a lot of power, money, and influence. And if you ever happen to think of an important Titanic passenger, your mind tends to go to people like Benjamin Guggenheim or John Jacob Astor, two of the richest men both on board Titanic and in America, and who are really only famous today just because of the way that they died. You'd never consider Francis Browne, a Jesuit missionary and amateur photographer from Dublin, who disembarked at Queenstown, as being the most important Titanic passenger of them all. But he was, and for one simple reason. He had a camera with him. Browne's mother died shortly after his birth in January of 1880, and his father drowned in 1889. And as a result, he was raised by his uncle, and it was this uncle who gave Browne his first camera in 1897, shortly before he embarked on a trip around Europe, where he proved to be a natural photographer. Upon his return, he joined the novitiate at the St. Stanislaus College, and he was ordained a Roman Catholic priest in 1915. Browne was in England in early 1912 when he received a first-class ticket as far as Queenstown on Titanic as a gift from his uncle. He boarded a boat train from London to Southampton early in the morning of April 10th, and like any tourist, simply began taking photos, including this one. Including this one of several unidentified first-class passengers. While on board, Browne dined with an American couple, and who they were has never been mentioned on either party, who offered to pay for the rest of the fare to America. When Browne asked his superior if it was possible for him to continue, his reply was simply, "Get off that ship." So Browne disembarked the next day at Queenstown as planned, taking with him a few dozen photographic negatives, including this one, which is one of his most famous photos, showing the sheer sides of Titanic. These two are of his stateroom A37. This one is of the Titanic's near collision with the SS New York as she was leaving Southampton Harbor. This is the only known photo of Titanic's dining room. This one is interesting because if you look down in the bottom corner, you can see that it's a double negative. It was a double exposure. And you can faintly see the private promenade of Parlor Suite B51 through 53 and 55, decorated in flowers as a gift from the White Star Line to the occupant Charlotte Cardeza, as her birthday was April 10th. This is also another really famous one, often replicated in movies. In a lot of Browne's photos are the last known images of some well-known people. Well, this one is said to have William Taft's military aide, Archibald Butt, standing in the background. And this one is the last known photo of Captain Smith. You can see his head poking out through the bridge wing cab just forward of the lifeboat. This is also probably the most famous Titanic photo of them all, as it is the last known image ever to be taken of Titanic. After the sinking, Browne realized just how important and valuable his photos are, and he negotiated the sale of them to major newspapers around the world, but he still kept the negative plates for himself. But as interest in Titanic faded, so did the interest in his photos, and the negative plates were eventually considered lost until 1986, 26 years after Father Browne's death, when they were accidentally discovered in a footlocker that he once owned at the Irish Jesuit Archives. They were brought to the attention of publishers, and since then, 23 volumes of his some 42,000 photos that he had ever taken have been published. In London, England, the Sunday Times even went as far as to describe them as the photographic equivalent of the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And no doubt that there were other passengers on Titanic who had brought cameras with them. 2 passengers are also even known to have had brought motion picture cameras on board with them, but none of these images are known to have survived. And this is where Father Browne's importance as a Titanic passenger really comes into play. Sure, we have photos of Titanic and her interior, but since Browne was on board taking photos and interacted with passengers such as John Jacob Astor and Benjamin Behind his photos are really the only way we have at looking at and knowing what it was like to be on Titanic, and they had a whole new perspective into one of the greatest and most famous tragedies in history.